Broadly speaking, I'm the first to acknowledge that the United States made great mistakes in the 2007 to 2008 period. I don't believe that the United States, I wasn't here at the time on January 11th, but I don't believe that Ambassador Butenis or her colleagues were the ones who caused 1/11 to happen. I don't think there was some secret coffee group that made the decision and then instructed people in Bangladesh what to do. But obviously, at that time, there was a lot of concern being expressed by the U.S. government about the direction in which things were heading. So during that 2007-2008 period, we shared the goal that I think the interim government had, and perhaps even the military and civil society had, that Bangladesh's democracy that had been promised in 1990 had gone off track, and there were fundamental reforms that needed to be made in order to get Bangladesh back on track. So where I give us credit is that we supported the reform agenda. We worked to support the caretaker government, including in times of need, like after a cyclone when the U.S. provided relief assistance. We maintained contact with all sides, but we were limited in our understanding because of the situation. A lot of the people whose voices needed to be heard couldn't be heard because of that time. Again, I alluded earlier to the role of the Army. I think we, the United States government, and perhaps others, including some within Bangladesh, gave too much importance to what the generals and brigadiers thought and didn't give enough attention to what the people of Bangladesh wanted. We talked with people, we talked with civil society, we talked with political parties, we talked with the caretaker government, but maybe we listened too much to the Army. And I think that partially explains why perhaps things did not turn out the way we had hoped. The other mistake I think we made as an embassy and as a U.S. government is we put too much emphasis on the elections and the election timeline. Elections are important. You can't have a government that isn't elected and has a mandate over the long term. An elected government has to also be committed to reforms for them to take root. But at that time, I think there were significant reforms that needed to take place. The caretaker government attempted to advance the reform agenda, but once it became clear that the priority was to simply hold elections and leave, they lost all of their leverage with the political parties. And the agreements that were reached with the political parties were done in secret. So we really don't know to this day what the former Prime Minister agreed to in her negotiations with the then caretaker government. We, at the time, the United States government, weren't party to them. Our perception was that at that time, the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina had learned their lessons, were committed to reforms, and would take forward the path that the caretaker government had set out. As history turned out, we were wrong in assuming that and in believing what we were being told. And then we saw the steady decline, which led us to the summer of 2024. So I think in many ways what the interim government is doing here is a reflection of lessons learned from the past. And I'm not here as an apologist or a defender of the interim government. Professor Yunus doesn't need my support, right? Professor Yunus has his own profile, and certainly those in the interim government are eminently capable of pursuing these reforms and fulfilling their mandate. But from what I've seen and from what I've heard, the way in which the government at this point is going about building the consensus on reform, engaging with the political parties, maintaining the primacy of civilian governance, even in an unusual situation of an interim government, I think that's all the right things. And in terms of the U.S., the final thing I would say is that while I was critical of some of the decisions the Biden administration took, particularly related to the January 2024 elections, I was very pleased with how the U.S. government responded immediately after August 5th. Beginning with the United Nations General Assembly and through the fall, the United States very openly, publicly, and demonstrably demonstrated its support for the reform agenda, understanding the importance of elections, but not getting involved in setting an arbitrary date. So as the decisions have evolved, they've been decisions that Bangladeshis owned, and I think that's what's most critical.